Almost a year after reading Queen Victoria and Prince Albert's love letters, I am back with yet another royal love letter series. This time, we're going to be reading Edward and Wallis's letters. Anyone who's been a long time subscriber here would know I am incredibly interested in the Edward and Wallis story. I've read at least a couple of books and made series out of them here on YouTube. And so when I found this book, The Intimate Correspondence of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, I could not pass it up. It was compiled and edited by Michael Bloch. Is it Bloch or Bloch? We're gonna go with Bloch. In 1986, which I believe is the year Wallis died. So that's pretty quick. There's apparently a reason for that. It turns out Wallis actually wanted these letters to be published upon her death, at least according to her lawyer, Suzanne Bloom, whom I believe we have discussed in a previous video. Incredibly controversial woman. In a nutshell, someone who apparently mistreated Wallis and took immense advantage of her during her final years when she had dementia and didn't know what was up and what was down. So not exactly a stellar character if you believe that story, but Michael, the author, was given these letters by Suzanne. And the reason, at least according to Michael's book, is because Wallis was incredibly disturbed by the rumors surrounding her and Edward's life and love story. And so she hoped that by publishing these intimate letters, that would help set the record straight. Now, this book is split into 3 parts. And I just combed through part 1 yesterday, 182 pages. You're welcome. So I really had to be picky with what to put in this video because otherwise we'd be here all day. And I'm pretty sure all of you have many better things to do with your time than spend it here with moi. But the good news is this is definitely going to be a series because you know me, I love my royal history series and I will find any excuse to start one. So without any further ado, let's get started. Part 1 of the book covers the years 1931 to 1936. And it definitely begins with more of a drip feed of romance and even correspondences between Wallis and Edward. If you've watched my series on Wallis's memoirs, then you'd remember, I believe it was the Valentine's Day video that I put out this year, that Wallis and Edward's romance was actually not a whirlwind one, as history would like us to believe. It was a very slow burn. They weren't instantly attracted to one another or taken by one another. Of course, Wallis was starstruck. I mean, I suppose who wouldn't be if you just happened to rub shoulders with the Prince of Wales at the time. But nothing dramatic in the way, for example, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry loved to portray their love story. For 1931, all of the letters that we have access to were written by Wallis to her beloved Aunt Bessie. She was incredibly close to her aunt, and in fact, this entire book is dominated by letters that Wallis had penned to her aunt. Unfortunately, we've lost the responses that her aunt would write her, at least most of them. Apart from reading a few incredibly interesting and telling extracts from these letters to her aunt, I won't be reading them out because obviously the point of this series is the romance, I suppose, the intimate letters between Wallis and Edward, not Wallis and Aunt Bessie. But in general, the letters are quite endearing in the sense that they really display how close Wallis was to her aunt. She even wrote her when she had nothing to say. And when it comes to Edward, for instance, they even reveal how, in 1931 at least, Wallis truly believed that she would likely never see the prince again after their first meeting. Speaking of that meeting, which Wallis told us in her memoirs, took place in November 1930, these letters are far more reliable, seeing as they were written contemporaneously, and it turns out they didn't actually meet until January of 1931. So they're quite useful with pointing out these little inaccuracies that are understandable, very excusable, due to the passage of time. By the time Wallis wrote her memoirs, she was nearing 60, I believe. Now, just because she didn't think she would see Edward again, that doesn't mean she wasn't hoping for it. In a letter dated the 16th of April 1931. She tells her aunt that the Thaws are giving a party May 24th and I'm hoping HRH will be there. I would like to be given the once over without the cold. She had a cold the first night they met, and so she was obviously a little bit not pleased with the first impression that she made. These letters to her aunt also reveal something that might be quite relatable to a lot of us out there today, which was the state of the world during the Great Depression of the 1930s. The letters reveal that Wallis and her husband at the time, Ernest Simpson, had long-standing financial struggles, which made me think about whether that was why Ernest was so keen to offer up his wife to the Prince of Wales. We know that Wallis was a social climber in a sense, and her husband was, at least to begin with, quite enthusiastic about the interest that the future king was showing his wife. And so he condoned their affair until he got sick of it. So I do wonder whether their financial strife, which lasted for, as I said, a long time, contributed to that desperation to get out of that hole and cement oneself in the higher echelons of society. Because it is quite drastic, as flattering as it is, to be able to share your wife in that way, especially if you love her as much as Ernest loved Wallis. Take a look at this love letter he'd sent his wife on their 6th anniversary. Heart of my heart, this is our day. 6¼ years we have been married. Blessed, never to be forgotten years. We have built much. Pray God we destroy nothing. During those years, my love for you has grown till even I do not know the depth of the breadth of it, save that it is something vast and seemingly immeasurable. Good night, my darling one. A little bittersweet considering we know that they did destroy it together by taking part in this dangerous game, by playing with fire. One thing I did not expect at all, this has never been mentioned anywhere else in any of the material I had read, Wallis had apparently been peripherally involved in a lesbian scandal, which, as you might imagine, back then in the 1930s, must have been huge, involving Gloria Vanderbilt, who was fighting for custody of her daughter, who was taken care of by her sister-in-law. I don't want to get into that, it would be a huge tangent, but Wallis had traveled with Gloria and her lover, alleged lover, a woman called Nada, to Paris in 1931. So she was actually mentioned, her name was brought up in the custody proceedings in court. Little fun fact. In 1932, despite Edward still being with Thelma Furness, the future couple, Edward and Wallis, had started inviting each other, not regularly, to each other's homes for dinner. So Wallis and Ernest had hosted the prince first at their home in London, and then the prince returned the favor by hosting them at the Fort Belvedere, if you remember from previous coverage. The first letter we see from Wallis in this year was actually in the form of a poem that she had written, at least I think she had, to the prince to thank him for hosting them at his home. Sir, bear with me and do not curse this poor attempt at thanks in verse. Our weekend at Fort Belvedere has left us both with memories dear of what in every sense must be princely hospitality. Too soon the hours stole away, and we, who would have had them stay, regretful o'er that fleeting slyness, do warmly thank your royal highness. But with your time I make too free, I have the honor, sir, to be, ere too long my poetic pencil limps on, your obedient servant, Wallis Simpson. Someone was definitely trying to make an impression, don't you think? And it's interesting because she and her husband had been invited together, but she only signed off as Wallis. Moving on to 1933, where a friendship blossomed between Wallis and Edward. He is still with Thelma, but this, if you remember from covering her memoirs, is when Edward sent Wallis a last-minute telegram wishing her a lovely and safe trip right as she was about to board a ship to the United States. And she had told us in her memoir that she had found this incredibly flattering. Then in June of that year, we get a letter that Wallis sent Edward for his, I believe, 39th birthday. Yes, for his 39th birthday. Note the tone and formality of this letter, because my goodness, is it going to be a world of difference when we get to 1935. Sir, many happy returns of the day. This small prezi is to conceal Bryant and May's matchbooks on your dining table at the fort. I am also enclosing your own spoon, which I borrowed from Osborne for the marking. Your obedient servant, Wallis. And now we find ourselves in the pivotal year of 1934. This was the year that Thelma Furness, the Prince of Wales' favorite up until then, had departed for the United States. And if you recall, had famously asked Wallis to take care of the little man. We know Wallis wrote about this. We know Andrew Loney wrote about this. Pretty much every biographer who wrote about Wallis and Edward wrote about this request, including Thelma Furness herself, who wrote her own memoirs and mentioned this conversation. 3 or 4 days before I was to sail, I had lunch with Wallis at the Ritz. I told her of my plans, and in my exuberance, I offered myself for all the usual yeoman services. Was there anything I could do for her in America? Were there any messages I could deliver? Did she want me to bring anything back for her? She thanked me and said suddenly, "Oh, Thelma, the little man is going to be so lonely." "Well, dear," I answered, "you look after him for me while I'm away." And I bet she rued the day that she ever uttered that sentence. Because what happened, as a lot of you regular viewers might already know, is that Wallis took care of Edward all right. So much so that by the time Thelma came back a couple of months later or so, he was wrapped all around Wallis's little finger. However, there is a new piece of information that has been revealed in this book that I have never come across before. It turns out that while she was away, Thelma had caught the eye and had spent some time with a known bad boy of that era, a 23-year-old Prince Ali Khan, who was the son of the Aga Khan, a famously rich Indian Muslim leader at the time. News of this had reached Edward, and he wasn't too happy about it. When Thelma returned, according to her own memoirs, he questioned her about it, and she laughed it off and asked him if he was jealous. After that, he had become cold and detached, but Thelma still believes that Wallis was the main reason behind the end of her relationship with Edward. Wallis's letters to Aunt Bessie are quite helpful and telling at this time because we learn just how clingy and needy Edward was acting when Thelma was gone. He'd spent almost every night at Bryanston Court, which was Wallis and Ernest's home. And when he wasn't, he had them over at the fort. As time progressed, Ernest's participation in these gatherings dwindled until he eventually stopped hanging out with them altogether. Whether he was bored, had to work, remember they had financial struggles, or whether he wanted to encourage a relationship between the two, we might never know. Very interestingly though, in a postscript that Wallis penned to her aunt in a letter dated the 18th of February 1934, she has this to say about the salacious gossip and rumors that had already started circulating about Edward and Wallis in the United States. P.S. It's all gossip about the prince. I'm not in the habit of taking my girlfriend's beau. We are around together a lot, and of course people are going to say it. I think I do amuse him. I'm the comedy relief, and we like to dance together. But I always have Ernest hanging around my neck, so all is safe. Later in May of that year, Wallis yet again, after her aunt had raised concerns, apparently the rumors were only getting worse and worse, Wallis tells her, "If Ernest raises any objections to the situation, I shall give up the prince at once." She also contradicts herself here, which points to dishonesty more times than not. When she tells her aunt that the three of them are always together. They're practically best friends. But she'd apparently forgotten that in a previous letter to her aunt, she told her that Ernest allows her to dine alone with Edward once or twice a week. So are you always together? Or are you dining alone with him more than once every week? And these reassurances and denials of the rumors, which we now all know were true, carried on all the way to 1935, a year before the abdication. Wallis tells her aunt, "You know I'm not going to get a divorce. Ernest and myself are perfectly happy and understand each other, so please put it all out of your head and tell people they can't believe the press." Is that so? (1935), the year that the cat was pretty much out of the bag, at least in the United States and perhaps other overseas territories, because if you'll all remember, there was kind of a media blackout in the UK. Even though people were suspicious and were eyeing Wallis in the streets, as she wrote in her memoirs, nothing was being printed about them. But it was undeniable, and you'll see from these letters, that things were really heating up between the two of them. So this is really when their love letters started as far as these records are concerned, because you'll see that the language they use, the nicknames, clearly imply that their correspondences predated 1935. What really stood out to me, which confirms obviously the overall impression and descriptions of Edward and Wallis, is how juvenile Edward was in his affection for Wallis, almost like a little boy. He literally refers to himself as a boy, and how maternal and authoritative, even commanding, Wallis sounded. The first letter we have from Edward to Wallis is very short, and it was written during Easter of 1935. My Enum,
my Wallis. This is not the kind of Easter W.E. want, but it will be all right next year. I love you more and more and more each and every minute, and I miss you so terribly here. You do too, don't you, my sweetheart? God bless W.E. Always your David.
Enum, according to Michael Block, is a word that they used which meant tiny, poor, affecting, or pathetic. And W.E., as I'm sure you can all guess, were their first initials. Now, to contrast this undying, childish affection, did you notice how childish his writing was? I love you more and more and more each and every minute, mommy. You know? But to counter this, or contrast this, the first serious letter written by Wallis to Edward was written to him after a fight that she had with Ernest. She writes, "David dear, I was and still am most terribly upset. You see, my dear, one can't go through life stepping on other people. I know that you aren't really selfish or thoughtless at heart, but your life has been such that you have been the one considered, so that quite naturally, you only think of what you want and take it too without the slightest thought of others. I had a long, quiet talk with E last night, and I felt very Enum at the end. Everything he said was so true. The evening was difficult, as you did stay much too late. Doesn't your love for me reach to the heights of wanting to make things a little easier for me? The lovely things you say to me aren't of much value unless they are backed up by equal actions. You must have understood from my conversation the first time that I was upset and also very disappointed in a boy, and that nothing you could say could help in the least." The letter goes on, it's quite long, but she continues, I suppose, chastising him, but then softening the blow and saying, "Please understand, I am not writing a lecture. Only your behavior last night made me realize how very alone I shall be someday. And because I love you, I don't seem to have the strength to protect myself from your youthfulness." You're hardly encouraging him to move away from that youthfulness by calling him boy, though, are you? And she also ends the letter with a God bless W.E. So he's clearly been causing issues with her husband, and she wasn't happy about it, which lends credibility to the version that she's always maintained, which is, I really didn't want this to go this far. I just wanted to have some fun, play with fire, if you ask me, and then go back to my husband once the prince tires of me. She fully expected that, by the way. And then here is another incredibly juvenile sounding letter written by Edward to Wallis on the 23rd of July, 1935, at 1 a.m. while he was away on a naval review on the English Channel. So he wrote this from his ship. Wallis.
A boy is holding a girl so very tight in his arms tonight. He will miss her more tomorrow because he will have been away from her some hours longer and cannot see her till Wednesday night. A girl knows that not anybody or anything can separate W.E., not even the stars, and that W.E. belong to each other forever. W.E. love each other more than life, so God bless W.E. Your David.
And he didn't stop there, by the way. The very next day, he couldn't help himself. He couldn't bear the thought of not speaking to her for 2 days. And so, in an act of indiscretion, he sends her a telegram from the ship's radio.
Good morning. We all say more and more and more. D.
And then the next day, he sends another.
I feel so enum not having talked to you today. Are you missing me as much as I am you? More and more? D.
Honestly, I don't know how she put up with this, because I'm feeling claustrophobic just reading them out, let alone being on the receiving end of such behavior, such affection, such
obsession.
Now, remember when I told you to take note of the very subservient formal tone of Wallis's letter to Edward all the way back in, I don't even remember now, 1932, 1933, and contrast it with the tone of her notes now. David, have the table moved back as far as possible. Also, I didn't see a green vegetable on the menu. Sorry to bother you, but I like everyone to think you do things well. Perhaps I'm quite fond of you. In another note, she writes, I think it would be nice to have the Winston Churchill drinks on the porch outside the drawing room. I also think you are a very nice boy. Really playing into that youthfulness that she complained about, not 2 seconds ago. As time progressed, as we get deeper into 1935, you can sense the desperation in Edward growing. In a letter he wrote to her at 3 a.m. at Fort Belvedere.
Oh, a boy does miss and want a girl here so terribly tonight. We'll try and sleep now, but I'm not hopeful yet. Have been numbering our pictures. Please, please, Wallis, don't get scared or lose faith when you're away from me.
Notice the spelling mistakes, by the way. He made plenty of them. You'd think someone with an incredible education such as his would be beyond that, but such was not the case. Take note also of this little paragraph where he expresses jealousy, going mad at the mere thought that she was alone with Ernest. I guess he forgot he was her husband. He sends her another one, which says, My own beloved Wallis,
I love you more and more and more, and please come down to say goodnight to David. I haven't seen you once today, and I can't take it. I love you.
And then, on the 1st of January of 1936, the year of the abdication, he writes her a letter in which he hints at marriage.
Oh, my Wallis, I know we'll have Field Clook to make us one this year. God bless W.E. Your David.
Final letter to close off this part of the book and this video, which was sent on the 18th of January 1936, a mere 2 days before his father, the king, passed. My own sweetheart.
Just a line to say I love you more and more and need you so to be with me at this difficult time. There is no hope whatsoever for the kin, and I won't be able to get up to London tomorrow if he's worse. But I do long to see you, even for a few minutes, my Wallis. It would help so much. You are all and everything I have in life, and W.E. must hold each other so tight. It will all work out right for us. God bless W.E. Your David.
And that concludes the letters for today. This is just the beginning of a very bright and burning flame that Edward clearly harbored for Wallis in his heart. And dare I say, the letters are going to get a lot more desperate and a lot more intense as we get closer and closer to the abdication and their eventual union. Thanks so much for joining me in this video. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a very nice change from the shenanigans of today. Stay tuned for part 2. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Good morning.
What the hell?
He's yelling.
No, he's not. This is a telegram.
It's in capital. Oh, it's in. It looks like he's yelling.
No, he's
Oh gosh.
He's not yelling.
Blooper reel.